Well, thank you very much to our speakers, to Cheryl, Miah, and Kassa, for a very detailed overview of trial quality and considerations, the responsibilities of investigators in international trials. We've got a lot of questions from members of the audience. So the first question, let's see, is addressed to Cheryl, and the question is, are we moving towards more risk-based monitoring? Cheryl, any thoughts?
Thank you so much, Leonard, for that question. That's a great question. So FDA has really been promoting risk-based monitoring for the past 15 years. In 2013, we published a final guidance on risk-based monitoring, which covered oversight of the clinical investigation. And then most recently in 2023, we also published a Q&A guidance on risk-based monitoring. So, at this point, we do expect sponsors to implement risk-based monitoring and to be using risk-based monitoring. So, I would, rephrase that, like, not are we expecting people to move towards, we are expecting that they have and are doing risk-based monitoring. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Cheryl. And in fact, the next question is very related, so I'm going to ask this one to you as well. It's a good question. What if we don't know the risk factors when we design the experiment? Can we modify the design after we identify the risk factors for the trial, after the trial has been initiated? This is because sometimes there may be unknown risk factors until the trial is started. So how does that relate to risk-based monitoring and changing mid-course?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Leonard. I think that is another great question. So, first, for the first part, there is a lot of critical thinking that goes into identifying, the critical to quality factors of your trial and the risk to those critical to quality factors. And also the risk mitigation strategies to mitigate the risk to those critical to quality factors. So this really is a multidisciplinary approach. So, when sponsors are designing the protocol, they really need to involve multiple perspectives. Like the clinical investigators, they need to talk to the data managers, they need to talk to their service providers, they need to get a patient perspective, to help them identify, all these things. And then the sponsor really needs to communicate what's critical to quality to all those involved in the trial so that everyone, understands and focuses, their, clinical investigators can focus their oversight, service providers can focus, what they're doing to ensure that, they get right what they need to get right. And all of this, really does entail critical thinking. And so from a clinical investigator perspective, you're like I said, you're probably wondering, I think I mentioned this in the presentation, what are some strategies that you can do? And I think it's really essential that you understand the protocol and identify and what has been identified as critical to quality. And it may involve having a conversation with the trial sponsor to discuss, the critical elements. And then it's, really important to assess the risk associated with these critical factors, specifically, to identify which processes at your site are most vulnerable to errors or deviations, and the potential consequences of those risks to the, the critical to quality factors. And it really does require anticipating risks before they occur and determining, where more robust site procedures or additional reviews may be necessary. And then in terms of, whether, I think the last part was whether you should adapt, and you most certainly need to be flexible and adaptive throughout the trial, adjusting, your processes and procedures as new risks emerge. And to ensure the quality and that safety are not compromised. So I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Cheryl. No, I think that was a very comprehensive answer. Obviously, I think the emphasis is to try and avoid unexpected risk factors by being discerning and involving many people in the discussion. And obviously, when things do arise, there's some flexibility. So I have another question. This time it's for Miah. Numerous questions regarding delegating study-related activities to the clinical coordinator, site management organizations, including non-research staff and pharmacy staff. What is the investigator's responsibility for overseeing the delegated activity and ensuring that the study coordinator is adequately trained and qualified to perform these activities? So this is a question of oversight and training. Yeah.
Hi, this is a really excellent question and actually quite a common situation. It's really quite common practice and acceptable for investigators to delegate certain study-related tasks to employees and colleagues, but also to third parties such as individuals or entities like site management organizations or like non-research staff such as pharmacy that are not necessarily under the direct supervision of the investigator. So even in situations where the clinical investigator may be supported by the sponsor for identification of a third-party service provider, or in any situation where there's delegated tasks under FDA regulations, the clinical investigator retains that ultimate responsibility and is required to maintain appropriate supervision of the trial, ensuring data reliability and protection of study staff or study participants. So when tasks are delegated by an investigator, the investigator is responsible for providing adequate supervision of those tasks delegated and are accountable for, ensuring regulatory compliance. But given that responsibility, I think the best way to address this is I would like to point out that something that you would want to consider are aspects that FDA considers that we focus on during our inspections with respect to adequacy of supervision and oversight. Such as like individuals, whether individuals who are delegated tasks are qualified to perform those tasks, whether the study staff or third-party vendors are receiving adequate training in order to perform that specific task, particularly those when involving critical quality factors. Other aspects, again, like the adequate supervision and involvement of ongoing study procedures. As for specific recommendations or strategies, FDA may provide, suggestions on approaches through guidance documents. However, generally our position is that you identify what best meets the needs and accommodations of your organization so that you can satisfy the requirements of the applicable statutes and regulations. I hope that answers the question, but before I turn it back over to you, Leonard, I would like to point out, I will say that my presentation and the responsibility, as I highlighted, the responsibilities are really a heavy burden. But I would also like to assure that as clinical investigators, your work is the cornerstone of advancing science and medicine. And like with each challenge overcoming in complying with the regulatory requirements and overseeing the numerous study staff and ensuring data quality and subject safety. Just generally, it's a closer step to breakthroughs in the future of healthcare. So I just want to commend clinical investigators for, their dedication and perseverance. I think that's something I'd also like to highlight, given the heavy burden of as a clinical investigator.
Thanks, Miah. And I would definitely echo that. I think it's a very good point that we certainly understand the burden on investigators. And obviously, we very much appreciate their role in clinical drug development. So let's change gears a little bit. And I have a question here for Kassa, a challenging question in my view. For international clinical trials, what takes precedence, international or local regulations? Kassa, any thoughts?
Thank you, Leonard. And both are very important, and the clinical investigators are expected to abide by both regulations, and there is no contradiction. And there may be, we do appreciate there are regional differences in terms of regulatory expectations, and clinical investigators are expected, depending on the type of study that they are involved with, whether it's an IND based study or an NIND study, to meet the expectation, the global standard. Whether if it is an NIND study, we do anticipate clinical investigators to conduct their studies according to GCP. And if they signed up for 1572, the expectation also to meet the FDA regulatory requirements. But in general, even though there may be some differences from regulation perspective between different countries, the expectation by FDA is to have clinical investigators meet the expectation by both FDA as well as the local regulatory requirements. Leonard, I hope that answers, and they are complementary, not contradictory in general.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kassa. I think that's obviously a very sensible way to approach this. I mean, people have to respect the regulations wherever they apply. I have another question for you, Kassa. Also, I think a lot of interest in international implementation of trials. What kind of inspection, or how, I guess, are the steps taken to inspect and validate foreign data? So really in question on how we implement inspections on foreign data.
All right, thank you, Leonard, for the question again, and that is a very important. And the inspectional approach that we use here in the US as well as across the globe are very similar, but they take into account the various contexts that may come with this particular clinical study and the particular region. And we do on-site inspection, but before any inspection, actually, there would be a lot of work preparing for the inspection. And FDA reviewers look into the data, try to understand exactly at the site level what may have transpired, what may have occurred, and also the importance of that particular site in terms of reported data to the FDA, and gather information, and then inspection would be planned. And one of the main reasons for the inspection is to verify the reliability of data submitted to the marketing application to FDA. Therefore, inspectors will, whether it is remotely or on site in person, they verify the data submitted with the source records that are available at a particular site. Of course, the operational approaches are changing, and people have been talking about clinical trials with decentralized elements. And in those instances, we would try to locate the best place where we can verify the data. That's what I would say, Leonard. Back to you. Thank you very much again.
Thanks, Kassa. So I guess in general, the same principles as we apply locally. Cheryl, I'd like to turn back to you with a two-part question. Let's see if we can unpack this one. When a sponsor provides an electronic system to the site for use during a trial, for example, an ECOA, what, if anything, should the site ask the sponsor to ensure the electronic system is fit for purpose and that it meets 21 CFR Part 11 requirements? So in other words, the question is, what should the site ask of the sponsor to ensure that the system is fit for purpose? And the second part of the question, which I can repeat later, is if there's a data integrity issue specifically related to the system that the sponsor provided, could the site receive a 483 warning letter for the data integrity issue? So could the site be held responsible for the system that the sponsors implemented? Able to tackle that one, Cheryl?
Yes, thank you. And that is really, honestly, an excellent question, because we do get this question a lot. And, we recently put out a guidance I think it was in November of 2024 on use of electronic, it's a final guidance, use of electronic systems, electronic records, and electronic signatures in clinical investigations. It's a Q&A guidance. And, that guidance does address the responsibilities for these systems and ensuring that they're fit for purpose. So I'll explain the fit for purpose assessment next, but I do want to talk about who's responsible for ensuring that a system is fit for purpose. And in the guidance, we do address that, and we talk about this in terms of who is deploying the system. So if a sponsor is deploying a system, and this includes any system that they have contracted a service provider to provide, they need to ensure that that system is fit for purpose. They need to do the assessment and that it does what it intends to do in that, for the purposes of that clinical trial. The investigator site has the responsibility for using that system appropriately and using it according to, the training that they received. And so in terms of like a 483 citation, if there's something wrong with the system design, or the system doesn't have adequate audit trails, or the system is not capturing the data in a way that we can tell that it's attributable, it's unlikely that the site is going to get a citation. We're going to go back to the sponsor who was responsible because they deployed that system. However, if the site uses the system wrong, if they're sharing passwords, and other people are entering data under someone else's password, or they're doing something where they cause the data quality issue, then most likely the site will be cited. If you review the system that the sponsor is deploying and you see that it doesn't have appropriate audit trails, or you have questions about something, then you could go back and discuss these with the sponsor. But really, it's going to be the sponsor. It falls on the sponsor's responsibility to ensure that that system is fit for purpose if they deployed it. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Cheryl. I think that's a very clear answer. I mean, there's aspects which the sponsor is clearly responsible for, and there may be aspects in implementation which the site carries the responsibility for. Miah, I have a question for you. It's a simple one, but obviously important answer. If we need assistance with filling out clinicaltrials.gov forms, who can we contact? Any advice there?
Yes, that's actually a really great question. I do have a simple answer for that, as well as maybe I might expand. So it's a great question. So in the simple answer is you would contact NIH at register@clinicaltrials.gov, which is an email address, and you would contact them directly through email. The elaborated question is, as I was noting in the presentation, the primary responsibilities are split between NIH, NLM, and FDA, and FDA being responsible for compliance and enforcement activities. But NIH is responsible for maintaining the database itself. So that's the reason why the primary contact for submitting information to clinicaltrials.gov, you would be working directly with register@clinicaltrials.gov. So you'd be, if you have questions about regulations at 42 CFR Part 11, or questions about how to register or how to create an account through PRS, any technical issues, you would contact them directly. I also do want to take this quick moment because I recognize that during my presentation, I did not speak to the types of compliance actions that FDA may take. So I just wanted to take this quick opportunity to expand on that. So at FDA, we take a risk-based approach to prioritizing compliance and enforcement actions. So essentially, like prioritizing those that pose the highest or greatest risk to public health. So we might issue a preliminary notice of noncompliance, which you might find on FDA's website, as well as a notice of noncompliance. And the intent is to encourage voluntary compliance. So, for example, like failure to address potential violations of results information reporting or not registering a trial. These letters are publicly available. So if you go to FDA's website, you'll see that they are available. Again, generally the first step would be ideally voluntary compliance, but FDA may issue a preliminary notice of noncompliance, which if you're not addressing those violations, the next step would be a notice of noncompliance and or civil money penalties. So in general, our agency is encouraging sponsors, researchers to uphold their legal and ethical responsibilities in registering and submitting trial results information. Again, I think I believe they posted the link to the 3-parts webinar series in the Q&A box. But again, the short answer was contact them at register@clinicaltrials.gov. Thanks, Leonard.
Thanks very much, Miah, and thanks for expanding a little bit on the communications that we can issue. I think it's very helpful for investigators to understand this. I'm going to turn back to Kassa with an interesting question. This is very perceptive. Different ethnic groups in clinical practice need to be considered. We did a clinical trial in Asia and Europe. Could we use such data to represent such ethnic groups in the US? Kassa, any thoughts?
Thank you very much, Leonard. And yes, indeed. I mean, as everybody knows, if the emphasize and one is that, I mean, it's going to help us in having the ability to generalize the study results for the people across the globe. Of course, the equity issue also may be raised. Therefore, wherever it may be, I mean, if they encourage clinical investigators and others to include diverse patient population. And I think I saw also a couple of similar questions, Leonard, along that line. And just what I want to emphasize is diversity, and that we have been emphasizing the need to diversify patients. When I say diversity, it's not only ethnicity, gender, age group, and different kind of groups. I think that helps the strengths of the result in terms of the inference that we make on any medical product. That's what I would say. Leonard, back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kassa, and I completely agree. I mean, people don't just stay in one place. People travel all over the world. Some come here, some from here leave to other places. So I don't think it makes a difference where you come from. It's just that we get the correct representation of populations with different sort of genetic constitutions, so on. Exactly. So let's see. I think we're almost out of time. I have a long question, but let's see if we can get through some of this. Cheryl, for you. Thanks for an excellent presentation. Can you speak to whether an emphasis on critical to quality factors might affect BIMO, clinical investigator and sponsor investigator inspections? Critical to quality factors might affect BIMO inspections. Could this impact what field investigators focus on during either routine pre-approval inspections or other types of inspections? Any thoughts there, Cheryl?
Yeah, again, another excellent question. So thank you for that question. So yes, it will, and it is impacting our inspection assignments. So, this is an exercise that we do internally about identifying when an application comes in-house. We work with the review division about identifying what's most important to their review, and we try to focus our inspections on those. And this afternoon, I don't want to, I don't know, bust the balloon or bust the bubble for what people are going to present this afternoon, because you're going to hear a lot more about inspections in session 2 today. But I will say that, we do make an effort to focus on what is most important, to the review division in the review. So, and it will impact what the field investigators are also going to look at during inspections.
Great, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of our session here. On behalf of ourselves, the organizers, on behalf of the attendees, I wanted to thank you folks for an excellent discussion here and excellent presentations. We're going to be taking a break. We will reconvene at 15 minutes past the hour, so you have 25 minutes to refresh yourselves. And this afternoon's session will be led by my colleague, Kim Smith. Thank you.